This is Hugh. Now I'm going to show you how to compile the Linux kernel in user mode or user mode Linux, and it's going to run as a process. So you'll see it in the output of ps-aux, and it'll be in the user land of the application space in memory. So first of all, let's launch a Docker image into a container. So now that we have GCC Docker image, we'll go into the home folder, run apt update to update the index of the package manager. That's connecting to the internet. Okay. Now we're going to install a bunch of build tools. Okay, now download the Linux kernel source code. Extract the source code to your local directory. It's going to have a subfolder called Linux with the version appended. Next, go inside the directory, and you can see the parent folder has just a file and the directory. So now we're on to custom Linux stuff. So these are the build commands. This one cleans out any build artifacts that might be present from previous compilation process. So we won't have anything because it's a fresh download, but you can run it anyway. Make Mr. Proper. Now, next we're going to run the default configuration make file. So that's going to launch the build process and set a bunch of settings like ext4 and initramfs and loadable modules. All of that is going to be turned on by default, and the architecture is user mode Linux. So we'll just run this now. Now, if you want to make custom modifications to the configuration for the build, you can run menu config with the architecture, but you're going to need a larger display for your terminal. So let's connect to Docker again, the Docker container. So you can see our Linux directory, which is there. So now we can run menu config and add some customizations if we want. This is an optional step. You don't need to do this if you don't want. And it should load up the UI. So you can see that there's a bunch of stuff like network. So hit enter to go inside the submenu. And you can see it has slurp turned on. You can see file systems has ext4 turned on. Now, if you want to enable something or disable it, you can just hit spacebar and that'll trigger it. So we'll just get out of this. We don't want to make any changes from the default. That's fine. So let's make our file system where the operating system is going to live. So we run dd to create the sparse file. Next, you want to format the image with ext4 and label it Alpine root. And the name of the resulting file is going to be called rootfs. So you can see it there. Next, you want to mount that file system so that we can put stuff inside. That file is going to be mounted to mount UML. Then you can list your block devices to see that it's mounted and your mount points. So next you want to get the Alpine file system and package manager. So let's download that to our local directory. And extract it into our mount point. Next, you want to launch the Alpine Package Manager to create Alpine base. So now that is installed into Mount UML. So let's just have a look at what's in there. So now there's a bunch of stuff in here that wasn't there previously. Next, you want to compile Linux. So that is the kernel in the current directory. So we're going to run the builder. you can see the parameter to the build command as architecture user mode. So that means it's going to be compiled to run as a standard application. Okay, so we just ran the build command, and now we're going to see which artifacts are in the current directory. So we should have VM Linux and Linux. So these are the targets that we wanted to make. Next, we can compile the external kernel modules. So we're going to give it the same architecture as user mode and compile that. Next, you want to install the kernel modules to our mount point, mount UML. Now you want to make some customizations to the deployment. So we are going to add our file system table entry for Alpine root and wipe the existing configuration. Next, we are going to add the Alpine Linux repositories. And add the name server to resolve.conf, all inside user mode Linux. So we've just added the Google one, 8.8.8.8. Next, very important that before you launch Linux, you must unmount the image. So now it's unmounted. You can use this application called Slurp, which will allow us to connect to the internet from the inside the kernel to the host and then to the outside world, from the guest to the host. So let's run that and launch it in the background as a job. And you want to do bg %1 to turn it on. So next you want to set the temp directory . And now we want to launch the Linux kernel. So we have a bunch of parameters here that we're setting: the root file system, read-write permissions, the amount of memory, the init command that's going to, the process that's going to launch when it starts, file system type, Ethernet 0 connection. So let's launch this. So that's in the local directory. It's going to be, we're going to be launching this application. So now we are inside user mode Linux. Next, we can set our PS1 just to make it more friendly. So now we can see clearly that we're inside user mode Linux. So let's mount proc sysfs. Set our networking. I have configured ETH0. So now we're connected to Slurp. Add a root. So it's our network root set. And now we should be able to query the DNS server for google.com entry. So you can see the records there. Next, you want to APK update the index for the application manager inside user mode Linux. This is the one that we added earlier. Okay, now we can search for curl. And our application is there, so we can just go apk add curl to install it. Now let's test out our new application. So you can see that we can access Reddit and read the Reddit posts. Now that we're finished, we can exit user mode Linux gracefully by calling the halt command. Turn off slurp. And we're done.